where we really just have an informal conversation about some of the issues of the day. And while the gender, unfortunately, of our panelists is not as diverse as it probably should be, the experience is diverse. So we have someone here from the pulpit, one of the original freedom fighters in the movement, going back to the early sit-ins in Nashville, to someone who is largely responsible in my generation. And that would probably include, anybody born in the last 40 years. Someone who has introduced us back to where we are from on the continent, knowing where we are. I kind of think that if Dr. King and Malcolm had not been assassinated by the federal government, that they would have been working with this brother right here, because they would have said, well, hold up now. We come from Africa. We are a great people. We're the first civilization builders, the first doctors, the first scientists, the first people to interpret humankind's relationship with God. They would have come to that. It's like we did, because we didn't know. All right? To someone who was trying to get us paid in terms of our reparations. And then someone representing the generation after our original freedom fighters generation, the son of Dick Gregory, following in the footsteps of his father. So I think we're going to have a great conversation tonight. And we want to talk about how what we have experienced has brought us here today. And each of the panelists will talk about where we are today in the context of the work that they are doing. What is the state from the perspective of this freedom fighting generation? What is the state of the Black church in terms of freedom? What is the state of our people's awareness of our culture and mind and brain and mentality? What is the state of our reparations movement? And what is the state of modern day activism? How we apply what we learned to step forward with this new generation. That makes sense? So that will be our conversation. So each of the panelists, if they could take 3, no more than 5 minutes to answer the question, what we have learned, how they are applying it today in their lane. We got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different lanes, and these lanes can set sometimes too. But this is a diverse. I don't think there's anybody left out. Only group not represented up here right now are surgeons. If there's a Black surgeon in, but these folk are doing surgery in their own way. So not only because of gender, but because of longevity and eldership. We just met on yesterday. We're going to hear from her first. And in fact, what I'm going to do, I'm going to just introduce everybody. I won't do that yet, but I'll do it one at a time. She is, we just met on yesterday. And come to find out, it's a small world. She was a student at Fisk University when my grandfather was director of admissions. And she was a part of the original sit-in movement at Fisk. I was reminiscing with my relatives last night after Reverend Durley spoke at Tabernacle. Reverend Durley, how many of y'all were Tabernacle last night? So he talked about Tennessee State. He went to Tennessee State with my whole family. My grandfather graduated summa cum from Tennessee State in 1933, my grandmother in 1935. And so we connected on all of that. When the sit-in movement was going on, my mother was a student at Pearl High School in Nashville. And students at Fisk were going, but my mother was still in high school. The students from Pearl would leave and join y'all. But for some reason, everybody was very protective of my mother. And so when the kids would walk out of Pearl High School to go down to Woolworths downtown and elsewhere in Nashville, the order was, the edict was, my mother couldn't go. They were afraid she was going to get hurt. Nobody wanted to see Janet hurt. You know, she was sweet. Janet, stay here, you can't go. And so my grandfather, before he was director of admissions at Fisk, was in the public school system. He had taught at Pearl. So a lot of the teachers at Pearl knew my family. So when other kids would leave, they would stand at the door, waiting for my mother to come through and stop her. And so she always would tell us, I want to go, but nobody would let me. Everybody, for some reason, was very protective of her. But my grandfather was at Fisk when this young lady was at Fisk. Remember, Darrell told the story last night about Dr. King coming to Fisk to speak to the students after they had gotten out of jail from that movement, Nashville City movement. It's now, they rebuilt the Woolworth, put the original lunch counter back out in there while that took place. And but she's going to tell us about that experience and what she sees there, because she's still here. I think it's fascinating when we hear from people who were doing this 50 years ago now, and where we are today. It's 2020, isn't it? Woo! 61 years. Snick. What year anniversary of Snick is this? 60? 60 Snick. So the 60th anniversary of Snick. So without delay, let's start. It's 60th anniversary. So without delay, let us hear from one of the original members of Nashville City Movement from Fisk University, Angeline Butler, please. Round of applause.
That's my profession. Okay. I think I better stand up, because of the cord and everything. Plus, I'm more comfortable standing up, on the floor. Currently, I'm a professor at John Jay College of Criminal Justice in New York. And I have 106 students in 3 classes. One is race and ethnicity at 9 o'clock in the morning, 10:50 in the morning on Mondays and Wednesdays. And I also teach youth and activism, which is a new course that we have offered only 2 semesters now, and I'm the only person teaching that. And our students have to do 30 hours of community service with that project. And, but let's go back to the beginning of the sit-ins, okay? First of all, how many people have seen the book Hands on the Freedom File? Okay, if you haven't seen that book, go online and get it, because you have 52 women of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee giving accounts, personal accounts of different places they were involved, like Albany, Georgia, Mississippi Summer, me in the early part of the movement, Nashville, okay? And I think that you would really hang into that, because it will fill you in on a lot of things that we were doing. I can't fill you in on that in 3 to 5 minutes, but I can tell you that February 27th, 1960, very important date, 106 students were arrested in Nashville. We got a call from the chief of police that morning to tell those students, if they come downtown today, they'll be arrested. Now, we hadn't really planned for that. We've been testing since 1959. So Greensboro is not the first place, okay? Remember the 4 people say the sit-in movement started with 4 guys in Greensboro? That isn't true. Nashville was test demonstrating down since 1959 because it was part of the nonviolent workshops. And around us were people like Reverend Kelly Miller Smith, Reverend C.T. Vivian Shuttlesworth, Metz Rollins, and of course, Jim Lawson, okay? So students were at first going down to the First Baptist Church, Kelly Miller Smith's church downtown, but then they moved it to a location that was closer to the school because we wanted more students involved. And basically, we would put each other through what was the expectation of what would occur to you if you put yourself, let's say, in a lunch counter, because that's what we kind of chose as going to be our first strategy, okay? Now, it isn't that we were trying to order a hamburger, okay? That was not the objective. The objective was, in choosing the lunch counters, is simply a symbol of the fact that we have $60 million a year being spent in the Nashville community, okay, by blacks. And yet, if a mother goes downtown with her children to buy Easter shopping, for instance, and the kid says, "Mom, can I go to the bathroom?" Well, you better go to the bathroom that's got a colored sign. Okay, "Mom, can I have a hamburger on the counter over there? A milkshake." Guess what? Mom can only go to the end of the counter in order to take it out. They cannot sit at the lunch counters, just like, even though they spent their money in that department store, that $5 and dime a whole number. So February 27th, without giving you all the previous demonstrations, we made that conscious decision that day to go to jail. Instead of 350 students that we had the week before and the week before that, we only had 41 students upstairs, and there were 13 of us on the central committee. So don't ever let anybody tell you that from the student movement that somehow one person made a decision, or there was one leader. It was everyone. And we did not come to a good agreement that morning. Normally it's consensus, okay? We talk to each other until we make a decision. That morning we had 7 people, 4 going downtown, 6 people against, and 1 abstention. And we decided to take that upstairs to the students and let them make the decision. That was the first morning we ever took a vote. And the worry was, you know, like, Bevel was from Mississippi. Well, what the KKK can do? Burn down, you know, Bevel's homes, okay? John Lewis was from, you know, Georgia. They can burn crosses on it or do something bad to his parents. Angeline Butler was living in South Carolina. My parents were principals of schools and ministers. They could burn down our church, or they could burn down the school. They could make him lose his job, Reverend Isaac Butler. So we had to really look at all of that. And then when we looked at all of that, the danger we would actually be placing our family in, we still made that conscious decision to go downtown that morning, because one heroic person, Bevel, got up and he said, "Black folks have always been worried about what's going to happen if they burn the house down." He said, "We got up with the Roosters this morning to come down to the First Baptist Church because we knew what was happening. We had that call from the chief of police saying you would be arrested. So now, let's let the house burn down this time, and then see what will happen." And based upon that, we went down in small groups to McClellan's, to Woolworth's, to Walgreens across the street, to Canaan, Sloan, and Harvey's, and down to the bus depot. My group, when you see on television the white student pulled off the counter and they beat, that's Paul LaPrade. He was a transfer student at Fisk from DePaul University. The girl sitting on the counter next to him was Maxine Walker. John Lewis was in my group that morning. There were only 7 of us at McClellan's, but we were the first under attack. So the police rush in, they arrest Paul and the 2 white young men that fought him. And then they make us get off of the counters. So we are outside, and I think that we're all going to be arrested, right? But they just take Paul and the 2 other people. And Bernard Lafayette, whom you know, is going from store to store checking on everybody, because we had to have somebody, you know, out there running that chore. And Bernard says he lost his job that morning because Angeline Butler pulled him back into the counter and said, "We're not being arrested. Come on, let's the rope was there. We stepped over those ropes and we took our seats again, and now the police did arrest all of us. As soon as they arrested us, the group across the street got the word, and then they came over there and took their seats too. And it went on like that until 106 of us were arrested. They had no more space in the jail. So the Nashville, Tennesseans said it was 80 that day, but we counted 106. How do we count 106? Our charge was trespassing and loitering. Only $50, okay? And I have to say, we stayed in jail for a few days. Our parents were trying to send telegrams like, y'all get out of jail, the whole number. And we had to send it back to them, tell them we are not getting out of jail. We're going to jail no bail. And some of us stayed in jail up until 2 weeks until our attorney, Alexander Ruby, and the team decided they needed to appeal it. Well, we get out, and no sooner than we get out, we get these bomb threats in the dormitory. So we're having to empty out the dormitories every night. Livingston Hall. It's happening on every campus. ABT, American Baptist Theological Seminary, is happening at Tennessee A&I. It's happening every place except Meharry Medical School. So the funny thing is, about a week later, now they have a new warrant for us that was ordered by the governor. And now we got to turn ourselves in, and now this time it's not $50. It's $500. Conspiracy to obstruct trade and commerce for all students, and they had to turn themselves in to jail. Now, they figured, we're going to be in jail forever, right? Because I'm a student at Fisk. I'm paying, $600 a year for tuition, and students out at American Baptist Theological Seminary are paying like $200. And Tennessee State students may be paying about $300. So, and you know how hard their parents work to get that $300? That's a lot of money back then, okay? And plus the students are working in school to maintain and get a place to live. So they figured they had us cornered. But I told you that it was Maxine Walker on one side of me. Paul, that was Walker, that was pulled off the counter. The white student was next to her, and she had glasses. You always see that shot when they talk about the movement. Her father was the top surgeon at Meharry Medical School and head of surgeon, Dr. Matthew Walker. And Dr. Matthew Walker raised close to $500,000 after banking hours. And next morning they went down to town and they paid our bail because they would not accept land for anybody under 21. That's how bad it was. They never knew that black people didn't trust them in the first place, and they hid their money underneath the mattress. But can you imagine overnight close to $500,000 to get 106 students, and that's how we knew it was 106 students. Now, look, that's not the only time I've been in jail. Congress on Racial Equality had a summer institute in July. We had a Race Relations Institute in Nashville that Dr. Stephen J. Wright put together. Now, Dr. Stephen J. Wright, he was considered our first real black elected president at Fisk University. He came from Bluefield State. And when he heard that we had been arrested, he was at Tuskegee in a meeting. He took a train and rode all night back to Nashville to see about the students. And then after we had the conspiracy charge, he called a convocation and was the first black president of a college to support the students in what they were doing. And he was also the one to invite Martin Luther King. I just want to say this. My charges in other places. Ejection of undesirable guests in Miami. Mandatory sentence 6 months in jail. Jackie Robinson came down and bailed us out with African diplomats showing up in court with their Paramount Chiefs robes. Most of you would never realize that. We know Jackie from baseball. Okay? The next charge was breaking and entering in Crisfield, Maryland, because Reggie Robinson, whom you're very familiar with, didn't have enough people, so Angeline took 30 students down from Hunter College, from wherever in New York. And there are other charges. I can't actually remember everything right now, but because he's rushing me. Anyway, let me give him back the phone. The point is, here we are today. What's my biggest concern? Guess what? I teach at John Jay, and every single thing that I tell my students and stuff, they never heard of it before.
Angeline, let's give her a round of applause. I mean, people thought she was saying Maxine Walker. No, Maxine Walker. Dr. Matthew Walker is daughter.
And Matthew Jr.
Right. All right, let's give her another round of applause. I think I saw some LDF folk walk in. Is Legal Defense Fund in the house? I'll say y'all had kind of Legal Defense Fund in the house. Why y'all so quiet today? Legal Defense Fund. Is Legal Defense Fund in the house? I said, I'm going to text Cheryl now and say y'all got quiet. He is a young millennial pastor of an old landmark. And that's significant. And it says a lot. You know, we always talk about people passing torch to the younger generation. A lot of churches still want to keep the same old thing. And it says a lot, this being such an historic branch of Zion, that they would pick this young man to lead them into the future, into the decades to come. We're talking about Tabernacle Baptist Church, the location of the first mass meeting in May of 1963. They informed me last night when I was there at 5 that they want to commemorate the first mass meeting again here in Selma in May. And they said, will you come back in May? And I said, if 5 lets me come back to Selma, lets me back in town, I will be. So, that's right. You heard me. She lets me back. So we want to welcome our brother, because there's been a lot of question now about what is the black church doing. And I'm going to say something. Seeing something today that reminds me of something. Tony, you know, there's this kind of myth that all the churches and preachers were with Dr. King. Woo! Only as we think about that, I see some of these preachers, without even blinking or processing or discerning anything or scrutinizing, running behind some of these presidential candidates, just sprinting. And Reverend Bob was talking to me, he said, well, Mark, do they ask for anything before they go and agree? Or do they just take them? But anyway, so our brother here is in that tradition. And it's a symbiotic relationship because he's bringing youth and energy and vigor into this old landmark. And this old landmark from, you know, its very frame of the building of the edifice, the wood and the brick, is dripping the blood of the ancestors' struggle into him and into his spirit. And so we want to hear what he has to say, not only about what he's doing about Tabernacle, what it means to be in that space, but also where he sees the black church right now, what its role is, and what it is doing, and what it is not doing. So please welcome the Reverend Otis Culliver, Pastor Tabernacle Baptist Church.
Thank you. I'm honored to be a part of this conversation and to share this space with you, particularly with these great panelists, and to speak about the role of the black church. Some people have gotten to the place where they don't like the term black church because they feel as if when you use that term, you are segregating or distancing yourselves from those who are not of a African descent, ethnic group. But I suggest to you that there is a difference between the black church and a church that has black people in it. There's a lot of churches that have black people occupying the pews. I don't think they would qualify as what we would term the black church. The black church has always been a church that has spoken truth to power. It's always been a church that has had a cross-centered ministry. I'm not just talking about the cross of Christ on Calvary, but I'm talking about a ministry that has an intersection between the vertical and the horizontal. That we recognize that our faith has a vertical implication. That's between you and the Lord, but there's also a horizontal implication about how you relate to your fellow man. And we believe that both of these are important. In fact, you cannot have one without the other. You cannot have a vertical relationship with Christ and be out of fellowship with those in your community. And you cannot have a relationship with people in the community without having a genuine relationship with Christ, because both give you a heart of compassion. I've been struggling with this whole idea of what we have labeled as evangelical Christianity. What is an evangelical? And what it comes down to, basically, when you look up this definition, kind of simplifies Christianity to be, I am a believer in Jesus Christ because I believe that salvation is in Christ alone, by faith alone. And this is a tenet that all believers would strive to, that we believe that you are saved by faith in Christ alone. But the problem is, you just disconnected yourself from one implication of Christianity. Which means, as I said at Tabernacle last week, you can have a picture of Martin Luther King Jr. in your study and Billy Graham theology in your pulpit. It simply means that you just focus simply upon your personal relationship with Christ. And I can just be good with the Lord and never mind what's going on in the community around me. Never mind what's going on in my neighbor's life, or their health care, or their human dignity and decency. But I have a relationship with Christ. And this theology has caused a lot of people to just disregard how we relate to others in the community of faith, but even more so how we relate to people who are outside of the community of faith. So with that being said, since we have reduced Christianity to just a vertical relationship minus the horizontal, people have gotten to the place where I can go to a church that may not have any regard for my community, as long as they are preaching Jesus. Because we have made Christianity just a vertical relationship. So as long as they are singing the hymns, as long as they are holding to the traditions of the Christian faith, and as long as they are preaching the simplicity of the gospel, Jesus went to the cross, he died, and he rose again, and if you believe this and walk the aisle, you can be saved, then we feel like we're part of the church. But still in the history of the black church, it has been, you believe in Jesus Christ, now what? You believe in Jesus Christ, what are you going to do with this faith? What does this look like with hands and feet? How do you walk out your faith in your community? And so, as a result of this, I wind this up, I would say that there are people who have almost given up on the church. Some people believe that millennials are not interested in faith. This is not true. Millennials are not interested in a church that is not involved in the community. Millennials is not interested in a church that is not involved in an issue that's bigger than themselves. And this is where the black church has gone awry. We have become so personalized in our religion with what I would call Billy Graham theology and forgotten the lessons and the example of Dr. King to be in the community and in the streets. And as a result of this, our churches began to become so personalized they're disconnected from anything bigger than themselves. Meanwhile, evangelical churches would say we are connected to something bigger than ourselves, and they call it missions across the sea. Missions, short-term mission trips. And they put their people and young people in supporting mission work. And for the African American church, when I was in seminary, they would say, well, what is the black church doing for its missions, Dion? I would say, here's the problem. When you were going to Europe on 2-week mission trips, our mission was trying to get decency at home. Our mission was trying to gain equality in our own country. Now, the black church must remember that this is still our mission. While you may do mission work beyond the borders of this country, you don't need to look through a telescope to see mission. You can look out the back porch of your church and the community right around you, and the black church must again begin to connect that vertical and horizontal aspect of Christianity and take Christ to the community, to the streets, and stop waiting on the streets to come to the church and go to the people. Thank you.
That's powerful. We always, so we appreciate our brother. I don't think I had a chance to tell Tony this. How many of y'all know who James Cone was? Dr. James Cone. The person who really codified in terms of academia and academy, black liberation theology, that God is black. He passed away a couple of years ago. Many of us went to his funeral. It was the last time that Dr. King Hopefield and I were together, the famed scholar Howard Divinity. Riverside Church packed with nothing but black preachers, hundreds of black preachers. Now, I can count on my hand today the number of preachers that preach black liberation theology and that God is black in their pulpit. And most of them in the wing at funeral do not preach that. But yet they were there. Which said to me, brother, that even many of them believe that as the truth. But sometimes in congregations, they won't allow them to preach that. So it's sort of a give and take. Like I get invited to preach all the time. I can't go preach in every church the way I preach in other churches. I can do that in Tabernacle. I can't say everything I said in Tabernacle somewhere else. So we've got a lot of work to do, and our brother's right about that in terms of the generational piece. And so we're thankful to him. Next, we want to hear again from this brother who really has reintroduced us to our African cultural heritage and where we are from. Now, others have done that throughout history. He is a direct, inline, spiritual descendant of Dr. Yosef Ben Yaakov, peace be upon him, Dr. John Henry Clark, peace be upon him, Dr. Shashi McIntyre, peace be upon her, and on and on. They were literally scholars and lecturers. And, Audrey, we do that. We go listen to a lecture 2-3 hours. Everybody can't do that. What Tony has done is take a lot of this scholarship and, because we have younger generations now, boil it down into the visual, into the PowerPoint, into the physical visits to the continent, into the excavation, into the workbooks, into the class books. So it's right where anybody can get it and get a hold of it. You know, had those books, such and such for dummies. Well, he doesn't call his that, but basically everything he's done has been, you know, being an African for dummies in terms of what he's done. And some of us being unbelievable, most of us are dummies. I admit that myself. As much as I know, it's but a fraction of what it is. We used to have a friend, Bernard Irving, passed away recently. I think he used to say that African history compared to American history, African history was the whole length of the meter stick, but American history was just the centimeter in comparison, in terms of time, literally chronological time. He's got something big coming up this summer, I think. Maybe I won't give it away, but if he wants to ask, he can. He told me about it on the phone one night, and it was so amazing. I don't even know if I go, because clearly I don't know if I'll be extended. It's that powerful. I just, I might just turn to dust myself if I saw it. But we want to hear from our brother. The tours, everything we see, Washington Monument is an obelisk. All of those buildings that we see that are fashioned and rooted in ancient Kemet as opposed to Egypt. Knowing that about ourselves. Last thing I'll say, imagine we talk about the STEM fields. Everybody's about STEM, right? Colleges spending money on STEM, phasing out. Professor GW told me the other day, he's been teaching history for years. They put less money in the history department because everything's going to STEM now. What if our young people knew, because it's challenging, that STEM comes from Africa? That is in their blood. The first scientists were Africans. Du Bois said by the time Europeans heard of Africa, the whole of human ingenuity was already exhausted. Everything that we even think is new today had already been figured out by our ancestors. It's just in a new language and it's updated. It's African Science 2.0. That's what STEM is. Please put your hands together for our brother Anthony Browder.
Raise your hand. I forgot who said it, but it's a significant comment that the two most important days of your life are the day that you were born and the day that you realized why you were born. I was born July 26, 1951, but I realized why I was born on February the 21st, 1977. February 21st, 1977, I graduated from college 3 years earlier, thought I was smart, thought I knew a lot, until I went to Georgetown Law School and heard this professor by the name of Dr. Ivan Van Sertima, who had just published a book, They Came Before Columbus, the African Presence in America. And Dr. Van Sertima described Africans who had built ships, navigated the Nile River, the Mediterranean Sea, and the Atlantic Ocean, and had numerous interactions with indigenous people here in the Americas between 1200 and 600 BC. And he showed photographs of these heads, some heads as tall as 7 feet high, 15 feet in diameter, of African people who had come to the Americas 2,500 years before Christopher Columbus was born. And then he said that these Africans were from Egypt and the Egyptians were black. This is the first time in my life I had ever heard anyone say that the ancient Egyptians were black. It contradicted everything that I had read in every book, every textbook, everything that I'd seen in every movie, and that's when I began to realize that I had been miseducated. I had been lied to all of my life because of this thing called forbidden knowledge. There is information that black folk are not supposed to have because it changes the way that we see ourselves and think about ourselves and shape the future. There's information that white folk aren't supposed to have because it changes the way the white folks see us. Forbidden knowledge. Dr. Van Sertima shared with me, he taught anthropology at Rutgers University. And he said that writing that book, They Came Before Columbus, the African Presence in America, was the end of his academic career. He was punished for having written about forbidden knowledge. And so Van Serma put me on a quest to begin to seek out for myself information that had intentionally been withheld from me, people who look like me, and people who look like everybody in this courtroom. So I made my first trip to Egypt in 1980 with Dr. Ben. 13 days that I spent on the Nile transformed my life forever because I saw with my own eyes information that had been denied me throughout my entire career, educational career. And that's when I began to assume personal responsibility for re-educating myself and re-educating everyone whose life mattered to me. This coming August, I'll be making my 60th trip to Egypt. We have been excavating tombs in Egypt for the past 12 years, finding some incredible things, rewriting our story, and making this information accessible to students, teachers, and people all around the world. Now, what's so critically significant about uncovering forbidden knowledge is that one can be killed for talking about information that moves people outside of their comfort zone, that moves people off their psychic center. You can be killed, particularly if you bring up a subject matter like my brother Ray did this afternoon, talking about issues dealing with Black people and church and God. So let me say this. I'm respectful of everybody in this room, but I'm also aware that all of us have been victims of miseducation. Brother Maqubela said a few minutes ago, in talking about Black liberation theology, that God was a Black man. Well, if we just process some basic information, and during my talk this morning, I referenced the significance of people going to the Smithsonian Museum of Natural History, where there is a $15 million exhibit that essentially shares the information that I'm going to distill for you in 60 seconds. In this exhibit, it says, 300,000 years ago, Africans were the only people on the planet. 300,000 years ago, the only people on the planet looked like us here in this town. And that 60,000 years ago, a group of Africans began to walk east out of Africa into Asia, populating Asia, across the Bering Strait, walked through North America, Central America, South America, and every island in the Caribbean. That is a fact. That is not something that I think. That is not something that I believe. This is a scientific fact. 40,000 years ago, it says that another group of Africans from East Africa walked into Western Asia, the landmass that we now call Europe, and populated Europe. So just these two basic facts means the first Asians were Black. The first Europeans were Black. Geneticists have identified the process by which Africans in Europe mutated, lost their melanin, and became the people who are now classified as Caucasians. That gene mutated anywhere from 7,000 to 8,000 years ago. Now process this. Now if it's been proven that Africans, Homo sapiens sapiens, have been living on this planet for at least 300,000 years, and people classified as Europeans, or white people have been living on this planet 7,000 to 8,000 years, that means people of African ancestry have a 292,000 year head start on the people who are teaching us what the world is all about. People who are teaching us about God. And if the first man and woman lived in Africa and Africa alone, and if man and woman were created in the image of God, well, who is God? So something happened at some point in time where people took the knowledge of the world and twisted it upside down and presented it to us as a new truth. It is our job. It is our responsibility to learn, to do what was illegal here in the United States of America, to read, to learn to reason, to think, to process. And then with those skills, with those abilities, to begin to understand who you are, and more importantly, who you are not. And with that knowledge, we will be in a better position to follow in the footsteps of the mothers and fathers of humanity and create a world where we can honor every person who is of African descent, which is everybody on this planet. There is no such thing as race. Race was a false construct created by racists in order to separate people by color. We are 98% alike, every person in this room. Skin is an illusion, something that camouflages who we really are. So I am asking all of you, I'm asking my brothers and my sisters to be courageous enough to study the great legacy that our ancestors have left for us, to understand what it was like for African people to see God in their own image, and how they talked about salvation, how they talked about the means by which we can become creators here on earth. That is who we are as human beings. We are creators. And once we know who we are, what we have the capacity to do, we can create either heaven or hell. It all depends on who controls your consciousness and your perception of self. So I'm encouraging everyone here to don't let this celebration this weekend end with you going back home talking about how significant it was to march across the Evelyn Pettis Bridge, named after a Ku Klux Klansman. That's another. There's so many issues we need to deal with. We don't have time. But when you go home with a renewed dedication to study and to understand what life is really about, and become the vessel through which the God force will work through in order to create a new world for the benefit of those who have not been born.
Thank you, God. Amen. We need to get a forbidden knowledge app or something. No, we need an app so a lot of these young people go on the phone. We strolling through Instagram. We need some kind of Africagram so we can just get tidbits of knowledge about our history. Don't you think? When I got my master's from Howard, I drove to Catholic University to apply for my PhD in theology. And I'm sitting with the scholar priest over there. So why do you want to come to Catholic? What is your topic going to be? So Atlantis, I told him, I said, well, I want to show how the Catholic faith and religion and ritual is derived from African spirituality. And the Pope had just died, Pope John Paul. And I said, I'm also going to show how the funeral for the Pope was a pharaonic funeral. That was the custom of the burial of Pharaoh. And they all looked at me and said, okay, we'll call you back. I'm still waiting on the call. So the elders told me, they said, fool, why would you go over there and tell them this what you were going to do? You should have just got into school. And just then you could have done that. But, so that's what happened. True story. And they did call me a fool too. This book was just published by our last president. How many of you heard Dr. Frances Cress Wells, the guy rest her soul, peace be upon her as well? The author of the ISIS papers as well as the Cress theory. Pat Buchanan and Donald Trump and the likes really are not discreet. And here's another panel member, another millennium joining us. Come on in, sir, have a seat. Dr. Benjamin Chavis. Come on, Ben, take this seat right here. Donald Trump and others, they're not that discreet about saying that they're trying to preserve their white supremacist culture. She said that academically as a psychiatrist, an MD, in the early 1970s, Howard University. She said, racism is rooted in the fear of genetic annihilation. Now, people don't want to deal with what Tony was saying. We all were saying. All she was saying was that what racism has done is convince these people that if we get together, there aren't going to be no more white people. Black and white mixed together produces Barack Obama, right? So if everybody did that, when he numbered Barack Obama's running, right? And they fired her at Howard and ended her medical career for saying that. When Trump says we got to preserve our kind, oh yeah, that's good. So he's basically, you know how Melania stole from Michelle Obama? Trump stole from Dr. Frances Cress Wells. But we just lost her recently, and she was really such an important person in our lives, not to mention the fact reparations is our brother's other issue. He's written a book about reparations, with what we are owed. He's involved in the reparations struggle, which, interestingly enough, Trump and this crazy ADOS movement has been trying to hijack. But reparations has to include our mental health too. Because some of the fighting and backbiting we do with each other, and jealousy and envy and foolishness, it's just embedded and ingrained. In some ways, we stereotype each other. So this is the book. I want him to talk about that, talk about reparations, how it's being applied today. He's a professor at Morgan State. He was at Fisk first, speaking of Fisk, where he got to know my mother when he was there. So please, God bless and welcome Dr. Raymond Winbush right here.
Yeah, I want to start, but I'm going to take about 3 or 4 minutes. I don't want to wear out the patience of the saints. I want to start with a quotation from Malcolm X. I'm going to read it directly. He said, November 23rd, 1964, if you are the son of a man and you have a wealthy estate and you inherited your father's estate, you have to pay off the debts that your father incurred before he died. The only reason that the present generation of white Americans are in a position of economic strength is because their fathers worked our fathers for over 400 years with no pay. We were sold from plantation to plantation like you sell a horse or a cow or a chicken or a bushel of wheat. All that money is what gives the present generation of American whites the ability to walk around the earth with their chest out, like they have some kind of economic ingenuity. Your father isn't here to pay. My father isn't here to collect. But I'm here to collect, and you're here to pay. Malcolm, I think that Malcolm, more than any other person that I've read, and I've gone into depth with the history of the reparations struggle, captured it in that word. It's interesting now, as I look around, I think some of them were going to be here for the presidential candidate. Everybody's talking about reparations. I was looking at the debate the other night in South Carolina, and Tom Steyer, who probably is going to come in 3rd place in South Carolina tomorrow. He was talking about reparations. All of them were talking about reparations. The issue is whether or not they're talking about it just to get the black vote. Just to get the black vote. No other reason. A lot of times when I talk about reparations, people ask me, well, I don't see anything on the news about reparations. Like they're going to talk about black issues on CNN, MSNBC, and NBC. That's the whole thing on the talk about. And black folk have to start looking to other sources like Brother Browder here about where we get our information and where we get our news. How many of you have heard what is happening in Evanston, Illinois? Evanston, Illinois. See, you didn't get that? Evanston was the first. Okay, I didn't know that. Of course. I'm going to say something about you. Evanston, Illinois, a sister, what's her name? I forget her name. She's a council member. She got an ordinance passed saying that all money coming in from marijuana over the next 10 years go to repair damages, reparations in Evanston, Illinois. That's very important. That's revolutionary. And what is happening right now is that the City Council of Oakland is looking at the same ordinance to see if they can model it. So reparations are happening. They have happened. North Carolina in 2005 with the old Wachovia Bank. Remember Wachovia Bank, which is now Wells Fargo, which just got sued? They paid reparations for some of the damages that they had done because they were called a predecessor bank, meaning that during enslavement, many of these banks and landowners and enslavement holders would use their enslaved Africans as collateral. So if they owed money to the bank, instead of giving them money, these banks would buy their enslaved Africans and then resell them. And again, many of us don't know that history. Another very important event that is happening right now is the Georgetown 272. Idua has been very much, stand up, Idua. Just go ahead and stand up.
That's Idua.
That's right, Idua. I was saying about the Georgetown folks, you tell me if I'm wrong about it. The students 2 years ago, voted to pay $27.20 out of their student fee, $27.20, 272. For reparations for the descendants of the 272 people. The administration has been dragging their feet. The students are way ahead on it. And many of you know that Georgetown University in Washington, D.C., you go past here when you do your tours.
Yeah.
Okay. How many of you know that the priests that founded Georgetown University had sex with their enslaved Africans, sold them? These were priests. I'm talking about Catholic priests. Okay? See, all of this history, it's hard to discuss this history sometimes, but you have to discuss it when you talk about the issue of reparation. Mark mentioned the movement ADOS because every time, I hate to ask the question, I said I was going to say anything controversial like I did this morning, but are there any ADOS people in the audience?
I don't know where those come from. There's too much there.
Yeah, I said something about them in Chicago a few months ago and got booed. But just because the reparations movement is gaining traction and is expanding throughout this country, the white supremacists have a counter movement called ADOS, which stands for American Descendants of Slaves. American Descendants of Slaves. And they say that the only black folk that should get reparations and we should even care about are in this country and ignore the rest of the Africans too. It's anti-Pan-Africanism. They're angry. They were very instrumental in trying to suppress the showing of Harriet, the film, because the sister Arrigo that played Harriet was British. They have been against many of the British actors who have been. And all of it, and I don't have time to go into this, all of this stuff has been funded by white supremacists. And the last thing I want to say is that in the Caribbean, CARICOM movement, so Hillary Beckles, and this is on an international level, the University of Glasgow gave him 200,000 pounds. I don't know what that is. Is it 20 million? No, it's 20 million. 20 million pounds. To study the impact of enslavement on the Caribbean, and specifically Jamaica. And so the reparation struggle is alive and well. It's got some bumps. It's got some issues in it, but it's alive and well. And I would encourage all of you to join in COBRA, National Coalition of Blacks for Reparations in America. Join in COBRA. There's many of them in the audience right now, and just keep the struggle going. All right.
The Oxford genealogist expert, top genealogist in the world, DNA scientist, came to America a few years ago to write a book on DNA USA. And he studied the DNA of different groups of people in the country, different regions. And he found that in the Northeast, in New England, there was the purest white DNA. But in the South, white folks had a strong mixture of African blood in their DNA. And folk got mad at him and ran him out. I mean, folks down here in Alabama and elsewhere. But if we ever get the reparations bill passed, and folks start talking about who has African blood, I got to feel some of them folks will come back and say, well, now, yeah, I got some African blood in me after all. So we will see. Before I bring next, my brother spoke last night so eloquently. Stand up, brother. Tell us your name again. You're one of the elected officials here, I believe.
Prince Chestnut, representative,
Yeah.
state representative.
State representative. Prince talked about Malcolm X coming to Selma. And that's a story that is not told often enough. And the influence he had, Dr. King got out of jail the next day. Charles?
There's going to be a film shown at the Wallace Theater, Earl Goodman Theater, at Saturday at 1:30 about Malcolm X.
His visit here?
The film will be shown at the college at 1:30. It's going to be at the college.
No, but I'm asking, is this film about his visit to Selma?
Yes, it is in part about his visit.
Okay. Years ago, and Fire remembers this.
Judge Harris threw me in jail the day Malcolm came to town. And we were divided up and beat up in jail by Jim Clark that very same day.
Is that right?
Yeah, right.
February
Not this
6th.
courtroom, but in this building.
February 6, 1965, right, Charles? February 6, 1965 was when he was here at Brown Chapel.
I don't remember the date I was there, but
You were there. Charles was in the room, y'all, when Malcolm spoke at Selma. He was on the. You were there?
I was there.
He was on the Dies with his kid. That was in the movie.
That's our first black district judge, y'all.
First black district judge. Give him a round of applause. But real quick, years ago, if I can remember this, our next presenter is fathered out. We were all together. 1 year, it was probably about 10 years ago now. And an old timer came up to us. I don't even remember his name. And he probably passed away. I probably remember this. But he started telling us about the day Malcolm came, Prince. And he said that when Malcolm came to Selma, he asked to see Dr. King in jail. And then he and a couple other guys drove him to Birmingham. When they got to Birmingham, the sheriff would not let Malcolm in jail to see Dr. King, but he would let him talk to him through the window outside. They spoke to each other through the window. This was the story he told. And they agreed when he got out of jail, they would work together in going to the United Nations to, demand redress for our grievances. Malcolm was killed almost 2 weeks to the day later. And, I was talking to his daughters about that. They heard that story. And I just don't think that was a coincidence. That hastened his death. Have y'all seen Netflix movie, Who Killed Malcolm X? Yeah. For some reason, it was great, but one of the videos left out of that movie was when Malcolm, those last few days, was saying, what is happening to me? The organization, the former organization I was in, doesn't have the resources to do that. There's something bigger going on here. Yohance's father was very close to Malcolm X. And as no question, if he had been alive, I'm sure he would have been in that documentary. And was just someone who always lifted him up. And I know we still mourn his death, but it's important, once again, everybody found their way to Selma, including Malcolm X. And I have no doubt, as he yearned to join the movement, when he was in the nation, when he left the nation, I'm certain he would have joined this movement at some point. And Malcolm coming to Selma, who knows, he might have himself joined Dr. King in Selma, March 21st through 27th. So we just lost Dick. We missed him. Dick and I used to talk literally every day, every night. When I became a single father, he was fascinated by that. Because to his generation, men didn't raise children. We didn't know how. Boy, you know what you know. You know about that. Shut up, you can't raise no boy like yourself. But Dick was fascinated. He would call me every night. What y'all doing? How's my son? What y'all doing? Like he wanted to really understand how a man, women's supposed to raise children. That's what he was, that's what it was. how he could do it. And it was really touching. And he and my son, who's 17 now, developed their own bond and whatnot. And really, I must say, miss him terribly, because we used to come here and cut up. Y'all remember, some of y'all remember, I was telling Brittany the story, that Brittany's my producer, folks, by the way, of Make It Plain. Give her a round of applause. You know, Tony said we all like race is no different. That's true with Brittany, true story. Brittany's first, when she, how long you been with me? 3, 4 years now? 4 years. Her first assignment when she came on with me was to produce a town hall at Minister Fairhouse. And Brittany came right in and did it. I'm like, you good? Like, fine. She was all in the middle of it. So it was great, and I appreciate her for that. But Dick's was in this courtroom. I know Fire remembers this too. And Dick tore up the courtroom. And this was for some reason, some years, early years ago, the mock trial would be very solid. It could be a really solid thing. And we were trying the killers of Jubilee Jackson, trying the state of Alabama. And everybody had been Joe Brown, the celebrity judge, was here. That's how big this was. C-SPAN was in here. It was serious. So Dick was the last witness. And Fire asked Dick right here, sit right here. Well, Dick, you were here in Selma? Yes, I was. What brought you to Selma? Dick said, well, the civil rights movement didn't bring me to Selma. And Fire said, well, what brought you to Selma? And Dick said, I just came here to see a young lady by the name of Sassy Quick Trick. And that was the end of my trial. Judge Joe Brown literally fell off of the thing. He said he came to see Sassy Quick Trick and just got caught up. But y'all know Dick, that was Dick. That was who he was. And God bless him, bless his memory. His wife Lillian, God bless her, was here to be honored last year and marched on the bridge. And then Cory Booker used that in one of his commercials, Mrs. Lillian Gregory marching across that bridge. The other thing was special about Lillian, she raised, see, Dick was always on the roads. That's why he couldn't understand me raising no kid. Because Lillian raised 10 children. Believe it or not, this handsome young man is the 10th child. He's the baby. And he's doing his best to hold up his parents' legacy. His mom went to jail here before Bloody Sunday. She came down here pregnant on this point. It's in the Jet magazine. Google it online. They put her in jail, locked her up here in Selma. She came down here with child to go to jail with the people of Selma. Lillian Gregory did that before Dickie got here.
And refused to leave unless out the window.
All right. And she was pregnant, y'all. So, I don't know, but you tell us who she's pregnant with. I don't know which the twin, pregnant with twins. So we want to hear now, and our brother, he's so revolutionary. When he took his African name, he took the name, you know, the language where you click, the Hosa, I don't know if I'm pronouncing it correctly. Hosa, something like that, right? Am I related? Hosa. Wait a minute. Hosa. We'll do it. Y'all teach us how to do it because it's beautiful. But that's one of our original languages. People say, you know, we got an accent, or y'all got an accent because we the original language. Y'all come from us. Y'all there. All right, please welcome Dick Gregory, Lillian Gregory's youngest child, our brother Yohance. Give him a round of applause.
Good evening. Thank you, Maqubela. Always a pleasure to be here in Selma. And when I come here, I'm always reminded of whose shoulders I stand upon. Because as I've traveled around at different times in my life, depending on what my father did and was known for, the reality is we're enamored with celebrity in this society. And there'd be times I remember traveling with my dad, people would come up and run and ask for an autograph, didn't even know who I was, because we see celebrity. When I come here to Selma, you all here see the spirit of who my father was. It isn't about the celebrity that Dick Gregory was. It was about the fact that you all knew that he came here every year and was dedicated to the movement that was here in Selma. It's a true knowing and a love. So that, just by virtue of genetics, is based upon me, and standing on the footsteps, standing on the shoulders of my father, I'd be remiss in the presence of such dynamic elders, such dynamic energy, the energy of our ancestors, for me not to first give honor, thanks, and praise for you all here, starting with Mama Fire Rose Sanders and Senator Hank Sanders. If not with the sacrifice that you all have made for nearly 3 decades now, this wouldn't exist. And so every time, I can never come here and be on the microphone and Selma without first giving thanks and praise to you. For those who I have the honor to be on this platform with, are those I'm a student of myself. When I was in Howard, another a fellow alum of mine at Howard, I had your books on my shelf at Howard, Tony. So always give thanks and praise for those who stand, whose shoulders we stand on, including the blood that's in the soil of our indigenous American ancestors, whose trail in Alabama includes the Trail of Tears. Many folks who we think originated in the Midwest and Oklahoma, their story really was rooted here. So always hold up our ancestors and our elders. Mark, you asked 2 questions. And again, I too will try to be brief because as I share my father's blood, I also share his loquacious personality as well. So you asked 2 questions. You asked, what did we learn and how does that incorporate in the work that we do today? Well, let me answer the first question first. Again, like my father, I'm a bit of a Renaissance man and wear multiple hats. But 2 that maybe stand out the most are in finance and economic development. At Howard, I got a degree in finance and worked in the financial district in New York for over a decade. And also with my community activism, I also work in education administration. Now I know I'm already probably using about half my time right now, so when I talk about the lessons that I learned, I'm only going to focus on today the economic development financial side. Right now, we've got an election. We are in the midst of an election with not 1, but not 2, but 3 billionaires with a B. And when we talk about what we learned, I think about what I learned when I got my first job, working in New York City. And I went excited, went to deposit my first paycheck. And there was an advertisement in the credit union where I was going to, and it said, it was kind of a cartoon. It said, gold was unsafe and too bulky to carry, to keep safe, so we invented fiat money. Fiat money became unsafe, so we created checks. Checks, people learned how to counterfeit checks, became unsafe, couldn't verify, write bad checks. We created direct deposit, and then thereafter credit card and electronic deposits thereafter. And so, and following that line, I realized, from a standpoint of white supremacy and African oppression, African civilizations were too strong, so we created slavery. Slavery was no longer justifiable, so we created Jim Crow and segregation. Segregation couldn't work anymore, so we created integration. Follow me. What my father always taught me is that no matter where we are in history, just like whatever latest foolproof invention has been created, there's somebody working to hack it. White supremacy is always working on a plan. It doesn't matter who's elected. They're investing in everyone. And so what I learned, and when we talk about Sankofa, as Alexis talked about earlier today, for those of y'all who don't understand the idea of looking back and returning to our past to dictate our future, that's the most critical lesson that I learned, because what we need to be about right now is Sankofa. Because with 3 billionaires in the race, as they move from destroying African civilization through slavery and segregation and integration,
They used those things that we were fighting for the most and held us up the most to be the tools of our destruction. Maybe the only thing that got integrated was their bank accounts. Because what we do know happened were those incredibly strong Black financial institutions that existed in every corner of this country have pretty much been wiped out. In the name of progress. Now, I would never be so foolish and ignorant and uneducated to suggest that those on the front lines of integration were fighting for what we got. It was very clear. The former dean of the Howard School of Education, Dr. Leslie Fenwick, is finishing up a book talking about the impact of Brown versus School Board of Education on Black educational administrators and employees, and showing the fact that, so you have two high schools, they get integrated, one white, one Black. Well, yeah, you have double the number of students. Are you going to have two principals? No. So what happens? Black principal, white principal. Black administrators and principals went back to being teachers. Now, you don't need as many teachers. What happened with those teachers and librarians? They end up becoming custodians, cafeteria workers, so and so. What happened with those Black custodians and lunch workers? They became unemployed. Now, clearly, Dr. King and many of the folks at the NAACP legal defense were aware of that and even tried to take measures at that time. However, when we allow our history, we allow our history to be boiled down to little sound bites. I have a dream, any means necessary, without the substance of what real history looks like. We allow the great work of our giants who literally gave their life, blood, sweat, and tears for our liberation to be used as tools against us. So we don't honor their history, we don't honor their name when we celebrate a false history. When we say that, just like when we talk about, Maqubela mentioned my African name, I took on also last name, Maqubela. And there's a whole history and legacy that comes there in South Africa. When we boil down the history of Steve Biko and the African National Congress and Nelson Mandela to apartheid, meaning I just can't live over here. When we don't talk about the vicious savagery that was behind it. Rosa Parks didn't just sit down because she couldn't sit at a particular place on the bus. It was all of the inhumanity that was behind it. And what did we award that with? By integrating businesses in Montgomery, wiping out the economic core of our community. And so, when we talk about the lessons that we learned and how we have to apply them back, as much work, as much fighting, as much protesting we do, means nothing if we don't own the microphone in which we're projecting ourselves. In 1913, Industrial Bank, Washington, D.C. was founded as Industrial Savings, went out of business, was refounded by the Mitchell family in 1934. I was recently on a panel with the now president of Industrial Bank in D.C., Doyle B. Mitchell. B. Doyle Mitchell, and he said that his great-grandfather created Industrial Bank. When his grandfather created Industrial Bank in 1934, there were 5 other Black banks chartered in D.C. at that time. Now, how many there are today in 2020? One. Are we moving forwards or are we moving backwards? And this election, where we have 3 billionaires fighting to be president, and we in our own community can't even keep $1 in our community in more than 24 hours. There's a problem with that. And so often when we try to conceptualize things, because as we know that to consider yourself wealthy, most of us, if we have a salary or we get paid hourly, we do the math of how much we make an hour. If you consider yourself wealthy, how much would you say is an hourly rate if you made that to be a lot of money? How much per hour? How much? $200 an hour. Anybody else? Yeah, be rich. $1,000 an hour. Right? A lot of money, right? Follow this. And this was something that I saw online. I had to do the math because I didn't believe it myself. If you made $7,000 an hour, you said 200, 500, 1,000, right? If you made $7,000 an hour, not just for 8 hours a day, but every single hour of the day, every single day from the day that Jesus was born, $7,000 a day, $7,000 an hour, 24 hours a day, 365 days in the year, for 2,020 years, you would not have as much money as Jeff Bezos. You would not have as much money as Jeff Bezos is worth. Don't believe me? Do the math. You will get to $122 billion. This man is worth $131 billion. Based on what? A huge component of that is our consumerism. And I'm not just talking about Black community, but community of conscience. For all of those that are up speaking and protesting and demonstrating, Spike Lee's never shot a movie where there were not more white employees behind the scenes than Black people. As much revolution as we talk about, we are not demonstrating that within our pocketbooks and our community. You know, Byron talks about it all the time, and we're inundated with it all the time. Understanding that as much as we love Selma, and as much as we come here to honor and hold up this legacy, which is truly a homecoming for so many of us, if we don't support this economy, this will not exist. National Voting Rights Museum is struggling to hold on. And so when we talk about how we move forward and what we learn, if we do not start with the lessons of reinvesting in economic development in our community, we haven't learned anything. And so my charge to you all, I hand it on, is that the hundreds of dollars that we spend to hold a one-year-old birthday party at Chuck E. Cheese, Dave & Buster's. And my dad would talk about this all the time. We'll spend thousands of dollars, save up for a year, to load our kids in a car, drive them all the way down to Orlando to see a rat, as he would call it, and pass right through Atlanta and not even think twice about paying homage to Dr. King. Well, of all that money that we spend on our children, for the next birthday, take whatever money you would spend and invest it in a Black bank. Open them up a bank account in a Black bank in their community. Because sadly as it is, so few of us in this room now, don't even have a penny in a Black bank, which by nature are community banks. So start here, start with your family, start now, invest in yourselves, invest in self.
Let's give Yohance a round of applause. Flesh of his flesh, blood of his blood, Big Gregory, and reminds you of his father, don't it? Apples don't fall too far from the tree, do they? And God bless him for continuing his father's work. There's one thing I'm confused about. You said there are 3 billionaires? I know it too. Bloomberg and Stein. Who's the third?
The one who's already in office.
Because there's dispute as to whether or not he's really a billionaire. You don't believe nothing. I'm a billionaire. Ain't on money. Yes. I don't want everybody to run out of here when our next speaker concludes. We want to go with some calendar schedule stuff, please. And we're going to have a benediction. But New Jersey Institute of Civil Rights, Ryan Hagan just walked in the room, formerly LDF. Give him a round of applause. He lights up the governor of New Jersey every day in terms of mass incarceration up there and all the other civil rights issues taking place. I mean, lights the man up. He treats him the way Elizabeth Warren treated Bloomberg the other night. Our next presenter, I mean, this is of all the panels we've done over the years, this is one of the most powerful in terms of the range and diversity of experience.
That's right. Yeah.
Woo.
That's right.
This brother,
True.
if you don't know, Wilmington 10. Civil rights justice, United Church of Christ. 1993, he applied for the job to be president of the ACP. He'd been a revolutionary, an activist. You know, Bernie Sanders talks about loving Castro. This man knew Castro and worked with him in that revolutionary sense. Bernie talked about literacy, and that's great, but what we know is what Castro did for the African National Congress and the struggle in Angola and Namibia for whatever flaws existed. That's why Mandela came out of prison and we didn't see him and Yasser Arafat. Now, honestly, if I were Bernie, you say that out loud, folks can't really say nothing to you no more. That did happen. Literacy, you take that or leave it, because folks don't care about learning how to read in this country, unfortunately. Because if they did, we'd be teaching them how to read. But if you say Mandela went to see this man to help end apartheid South Africa when Ronald Reagan was still talking constructive engagement, shut folk up. But he was there, involved in the anti-apartheid struggle. So in 1993, he applied to be the head of the NAACP. Totally revolutionary. He was to be the most revolutionary. And Dr. Clark, John Henry Clark, he wasn't necessarily somebody that got involved in the civil rights organization. But even Dr. Clark said, we get Ben in there. That changes the game. We all met, we talked about it, he got the job. And the first thing he did, which some consider a mistake, but was in his nature, his revolutionary nature, he brought all of the Pan-Africanists together in Detroit. Angela Davis and Alana Gregory. All of us met in Detroit. It was a private meeting. Because we knew what a threat it was. Another Uncle Tom on board in the NAACP found out about me. Damu Smith and I got arrested, so we flew to Detroit to the meeting. We had to go together. Damu and I got on a plane the next morning. Front page of the New York Times was our whole meeting. The front page. Why do the New York Times care about us? They put it on the front page. And we said, oh Lord, here it comes.
That's right.
Ben didn't stop. I mentioned Mr. Farrakhan earlier. Ben convened the chair of the Congressional Black Caucus where he's in the food bank, and Minister Farrakhan had the Black Caucus one year. Now today, you won't find a black elected official in Congress that will meet with Minister Farrakhan. Because if he did, he'd have to resign. She would have to resign.
Now.
Ben did that.
Know too much.
Then that led to a summit of all the black leadership, the largest summit ever at NAACP headquarters in Baltimore. In the room, black doctors, black lawyers, the Pan-Atlantic Council, black professional organizations, over 100 some odd newspapers still in this country. But Ben, this brother has paid his dues. That's black press right there. Support the black press. But this is my brother, and you know, we have been through a whole lot of struggles together, including some of those guys. This is the 25th anniversary of the May Man March. 2 million black men on the mall, peacefully. Y'all shoot and kill each other, y'all vow. That happened on that day. Going back to Dick, Dick got up that day and said, for the first time in history, 2 million black women know where their husbands are. And you will never see 2 million people laying simultaneously like they did today. God bless them. From Oxford, North Carolina, y'all. Part of the city movement. He met Dr. King. 14 years old?
Yeah.
He met Dr. King. And you know, we love and appreciate him. And he has been a contemporary and a student like Tony and Ray and others of us had, Dr. Clark and Dr. Ben and Dr. Wellesley. I mean, he brought all of that synergy into a civil rights organization that up to that point was just known as an integrations organization. It was a revolutionary coup, and everybody was good until the New York Times and all that decided, you know, we pick your leaders, y'all pick your leaders. We pick your leaders for you. And that's still what's going on today. He's still our leader. We picked him as long as we pick him. He's going to be here with us. Please welcome the Reverend Dr. Benjamin F. Chavis.
Thank you. First, giving all honor and praise to God Almighty. I want to thank, let's give Brother Mark a hand, Brother Massimo a hand. He talks about all of us, but he doesn't talk about himself. He's a great brother. And I took serious exception to Sirius XM radio putting him off the air after 14, 16, 15 years of dedicated service. But that just shows you, in life, you never should miss a day or take anything for granted in life. Because sometimes you never know what tomorrow is going to bring. But you can determine what tonight will happen to prepare for tomorrow. So my remarks are going to be very, very short. I also want to pay tribute to Five Rose Singers and to Thompson and to the Sanders family. And I want to thank all of my fellow panelists. I'm honored just to be in proximity to each one of them. I guess what I could say tonight to contribute to what has already been said. Last night, at this time, I was in the White House. I used my credentials to be head of the Black press to get into the White House because I wanted to see, is this being recorded? I needed to see who was inside the White House. With red hats on. Make America great again. The east wing of the White House was full. Over 1,000 brothers and sisters. Black people. It was a celebration of Black History Month by the White House. Now some would say, well then, why would you even go up in there? I have a responsibility to try to see what is going on so I can inform brothers and sisters who didn't get the invitation or who may not have had the inclination to go. When I was head of the NAACP, I was invited to the White House a lot because that's what the head of the NAACP gets, those invitations. So I've been blessed to be an outcast, but also sometimes be an insider. But the thing I want to share with you tonight is that I am optimistic about one thing, and that's our young people. I didn't see a lot of young people in there last night. Thank God. But I saw a lot of brothers and sisters our age who are still looking for the fulfillment of a myth. Who believe that those who, let me put it this way, white supremacy is embraced beyond white people.
Exactly. Yes.
Some of us embrace white supremacy. And you say, well, if that's true, why are you optimistic? Because I believe the young people today, I'm talking about our Black youth, and Rose knows, I think I said this the last time I was in Selma. I think our young people today are the most intelligent, creative, gifted, talented generation of youth we've ever been blessed to witness. But this generation of young people need to be better informed, better educated. Somebody has to give them not the relics of a legacy, but the opportunity to build on. I'm not in favor of repeating the past. We have to learn from the past and push so that the greatness of our past far will be even greater in our future. We have much to build upon. But if we are building lives and families and communities, I like what the brother said about economic development. We spend over $1 trillion. We are consumers. And much of what we consume is not good for us. I'm not asking anybody to do what I do, but I do intermittent fasting. I do not eat after 6 p.m. I only eat after 12 noon. Because I realized several weeks or months ago, I was overweight. I couldn't control my weight. So I decided, after studying some African history about weight and control, so I've lost 40 pounds in the last 6 weeks. Because, and I'm not on a tangent, I'm just saying that sometimes you gotta take, if you lose your health, it incapacitates you to fight for freedom, justice, and equality. But let me go back to our young people. After all of what Mark said, when hip-hop started first emerging, I decided to embrace hip-hop. A lot of my colleagues and civil rights men said, man, you can't do that. That's not conscious. I don't believe from Winbush there's no such thing as an unconscious person. They're just conscious about different things. Some of our brothers are conscious about the strip club. That's why music, if you listen to some of the beats, it's about stripping. Am I right?
Taking it off.
That's the truth.
Taking it off.
So that's what they're conscious about. Their music reflects what they're conscious about. Mm-hmm. A brother who's conscious about Africa and about the greatness of Egypt and Africa, then our music and writing will reflect it. James Baldwin was a friend of mine. He said, "Ben, the pen is mightier than the sword." What are we writing about? What pen are we passing on to the next generation of writers, of journalists? I'm over the black press now. And this is another decision that I made because there are 230 black-owned newspapers. My office is right next to Tony's there, on the same floor in the 3rd Marshall Building in Washington, D.C. We reach 20 million brothers and sisters in print every week. But we have to be careful about what we print and how we print. What are the news? They just passed, it took 120 years for the federal government to pass an anti-lynching bill. It's called the Emmett Till anti-lynching bill. Nobody would have known who the Emmett Till was. It hadn't been for the black press. The white press would not cover it. And thank God for his mother, Miss Mobley, Miss Mamie Mobley, wouldn't let them cover that casket. And Mr. Johnson from Johnson Publishing had the audacity to put the picture on the front page of Jet Magazine. And some of us, I remember I was 1955. I was 8 years old, 1955. My parents would not let me go out of the house. I'm in North Carolina, that happened in Mississippi. Because all black parents knew, no matter what state, Malcolm was right, the South is anything south of the Canadian border. The whole country is the South. So, and so we have to raise our children to be freedom fighters in all spheres of life, in the courts, in the judicial, in the economics, in the social, in the academic. You know, we have to rescue our HBCUs. Our HBCUs ought to be producing revolutionaries in all spheres of life. So why am I optimistic? Because I believe that young people, when they get a taste of what's going on here in Selma, it'll change their life for the rest of their life. Our responsibility is to make sure that all of our young people, I mean all of them, not some of them, all of our young people need to be encouraged. And that's what's lacking. This device here, I need to find an app developer. We need a Black Consciousness app. So, because every time you cut that device on, you shouldn't have to hunt for no information. It should hunt for you. We have to pursue truth. We have to pursue justice. We have to pursue those things that our foreparents didn't have this technology. But they had the will to pass on what needed to be passed on. This is the 193rd year of the Black press.
That's right. Come on.
March 16, 1827, Freedom's Journal. What was on the front page of Freedom's Journal? Fighting against slavery. Fighting against white supremacy. Building institutions. There was a debate among us about whether or not we should go back to Africa now, whether or not we should stay here. That was on the front page of Freedom's Journal. And so for 193 years, the Black press has not missed a beat. Now sometimes, for economic reasons, there's some trade-offs, and stay in business. You have to decide, well, should I print this? Should I not print this? Are people going to come down on me if I put out the truth? But by and large, most of those publishers risked their own lives. A lot of the Black papers were dynamited, destroyed, driven out of town for daring to wake up Black people. Adam B. Wells, absolutely. And so there's lynching thing. But lynching is not only the physical lynch. It is the psychological lynch. It is the social, it is the economic lynch. You know, it's what we think about. And so I come down here this time of year just to get renewed. You know, to get revitalized. The movement needs revitalization also. Because we get tired, we get worn out. You know, and again, I don't want to put down the brothers and sisters I saw last night in the White House. I really don't want to put them down. They were looking at me saying, oh man, what's James doing up there? And I'm asking them, what y'all doing up there? You know, but because I know there's a desire among some of us to be with who we think the winner is going to be. You know, I know some of us has already said, well, this is my candidate on Super Tuesday. Or this is my candidate in this primary. Well, what happens after November? What happens after the election? Are we putting all of our stuff into that? We definitely got to go out and vote. We got to have record. This is the Black Belt.
That's right.
What happens in the Black Belt will determine what happens in Alabama. What happens in Alabama, to a lot of things, is going to determine what happens in America. So we got to vote. That's not an option. But my thing is that every day we have to wage struggle. Every night we have to wage struggle. We cannot afford to even think about giving up. And we have to put our energy, our resources, and making sure that our young people consciousness is better informed. You know, I went to the NWS, I'm in on this point. The Image Awards. I went to the NWC Image Awards out in Pasadena a week or so ago. The chair of the board gave John Lewis, bless his heart. He had to accept it because, you know, he has pancreatic cancer, so he couldn't be there in person, so they gave him the Chairman's Award. The president, Derrick Johnson, who's from Mississippi, gave the President's Award to Gregory. Rihanna, who has emerged not only as a singer, but an entrepreneur. She's taken the fashion industry away from L'Oreal, created her own fashion line out of the hues of African Americans all over the world. She's a rising conscious, Pan-African. She's from Barbados. And if you know anything about Barbados, they are impacted by the British mindset, because that's who the colonizers were. And don't look at the people in the Caribbean funny, because we are also colonized. You know, we're affected by our colonizers. But my point is, this sister decided that she wasn't just trying to look good. And when she accepted the award, and I'm going to end on this point, she says, you know what? I appreciate getting this award for NAACP, but we got work to do. Yeah. She said, me accepting this award is not about me. It's about what all of us going to put together. God, very free words from my heart and soul. Had everybody spellbound. And I was next to NAACP, I said, hey man, what we going to do about it? We need more sisters like that. You know? She ain't trying to be like Marilyn Monroe. She's not. Because she's realized God has blessed her with her own beauty, her own sense of self-worth.
Yeah.
And that's what we have to do, brothers and sisters. You not only have to know our God, know ourselves, know our people, we got to know our struggle for freedom, justice, and equality. Let's go to work.
Yeah.
Dr. Ben Taylor, give a round of applause. Hold it, before you go, everybody hold your position. Hold your position. We're going to just let everybody know. How many of you have a schedule? Fire's got the papers for $1. Get a schedule. Foot Soldiers Breakfast, Charles, first thing in the morning, 8 a.m., Selma High School, correct? Correct. I'm just going to highlight a couple of things. NAACP Legal Defense Fund and Reverend Browder at 3 o'clock, Brown Chapel, am I right? 3 o'clock. Go there and follow. This is the lunch, the Army of Mothers of Peace. Panel of women working in peace tomorrow, Selma Center for Nonviolence. We all know what happened Sunday. Nobel Prize laureate Lillian Bowie, Lema Bowie, I'm sorry. Women of Liberia Action, Malika Sanders Fortier, and Lisa Sharon Harper. That's at 1 p.m. tomorrow. In Culliver, we have in Culliver anyone? I see it, but where's it Culliver? 9 o'clock. Hold it, folks. Hold still for a couple of minutes, please. Please, folks, Sunday after we cross the bridge, join us in Wallace. We're going to make these presidential candidates talk about something. All right? Presidential candidates will be here. Let's have another round of applause for our panelists. Applaud yourselves for being here. Green County Democrat, Black Papers in Exhibit. Thank y'all. Supporting Black presidents.
Just one last thing. Thank you, Paul. This was an excellent panel. I think it was video. How many of y'all would like a copy of this, what you heard tonight? On this panel, let me tell you what's different. You have people who are Pan-Africanists and different bodies. You don't have a panel like this. Scholars all the way panel. So if you would like a copy of the video, and the proceeds will go to the Jubilee of the Museum, you need to let us know if you would like to purchase a copy. What do y'all think it's worth? $15? He said $15. Again, tomorrow at 4 o'clock, I didn't know if he was actually coming. We're inducting him into the Minister Hall of Justice right after we induct Bobby Lee